So thank you so much, Charlie and Emily, for being with us here today. We're really excited to hear from you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting us. Both Charlie and I collaborate a lot on the campus landscaping. He's the, as Haven said, he's the lead horticulturalist, and I'm the landscape architect. So while we have different roles, we have a lot of overlap, and we both love plants. Charlie has vastly more experience actually planting them and growing them, and I'm lucky to be able to rely on his expertise to let me know what will actually grow well here in our corner of the world. So we're gonna take a little tour of the campus grounds. We've got some photographs to share with you. We'll talk about some recent and ongoing projects, and then we can respond to your questions, whether those be about the campus itself or any home gardening issues that you might have. As Haven said, we're happy to answer questions, but we'd like to put them to the second half of this webinar. Okay, I am trying to share a screen here.
There we go.
Okay, we'll start at the Horseshoe, everybody's favorite spot. It's the original campus quad that's as it was laid out in the early 19th century. And just in the scale and proportion of the space, along with the simple elegance of the surrounding architecture, it really creates a very timeless place. And as I said, everybody's favorite spot. In a normal year, the Horseshoe gets quite a lot of activity, from Tai Chi classes to Frisbee games to full-blown graduation ceremonies and other special events. In this most abnormal year, without a student population, the Horseshoe has continued to serve as a welcome and therapeutic green space for many people in Columbia. Pet owners, picnickers, families with small children coming out and continuing to use and enjoy the Horseshoe, although on a much reduced scale.
We have seen a lot more families out there, which is kind of nice because there's not a lot of students. So you see a lot more of that picnic, and a lot of parents are not working or working from home, I guess, and bring their kids out, which is a nice use for the Horseshoe for a change. Although we enjoy seeing the students out there also.
After the 2008 recession, budgets were cut and maintenance schedules were pretty drastically affected. And the overall quality of the turf on the Horseshoe was quite degraded. And keeping a stand of grass healthy under such a large amount of shade trees is really a challenge. So in 2015, the entire Horseshoe was resodded. It was a pretty elaborate project. It's about 2 acres of sod, but there's nothing like sod for instant gratification. And here you see a post-sodding photograph of the Horseshoe. We used a variety of zoysia grass that was selected for a high degree of shade tolerance, as well as the ability to stand up to foot traffic. And it's been pretty successful, and we've only had minor annual repatching needed in the years since that was completed.
I think we also benefited from expanding some of the mulch beds where it was really shady and we just couldn't grow grass. So I think it was a smart decision to expand those and just get rid of some of the turf and the shadiest parts of the Horseshoe.
Expanding out from the Horseshoe, there are a series of small, more intimate gardens behind the original buildings that frame the Horseshoe. And we're going to take you through a tour of some of them. Behind the South Caroliniana Library is the Caroliniana Garden. And this is a popular site for wedding bridal photography and special events. The building itself is just undergoing a renovation itself. So when that wraps up in a year, we look forward to sprucing up the landscape behind there as well. A little bit farther off the Horseshoe, near the War Memorial Building, which is at the corner of Sumter and Pendleton Streets. This is a fairly new installation. There are now 14, but ultimately will be 28 markers with plaques and the granite markers, as you see. And these commemorate the 28 Carolina students who served in World War I. Another one of these small gardens is at the upper end of the Horseshoe behind the Osborne Administration Building. This is the Desegregation Garden, which was completed in 2013 as part of the recognition of the 50th anniversary of the desegregation of UofSC. It features some inscribed granite marker and granite benches. And again, it's just another small, intimate area for smaller scale gatherings, that kind of thing.
It's a nice garden. We have a couple pearl friar topiaries there also that he donated, and it's that and the Carolina Library Garden are really nice, quiet spots if you want to eat your lunch or read a book or something. They're kind of off the beaten path a little.
That's right. The next one is behind Lieber College, and Charlie's going to talk about this because he has put over the years put a lot of time and energy into this space.
This is the Norma Palms Memorial Rose Garden, and it's behind Lieber. It's been there for decades and decades. I worked on it 20-something years ago when I worked here, and it was renovated a few years ago in the School of Journalism, put in the broadcast studio next to the Rose Garden, adjacent to it there. And we have in the process of renovating it right now because we've had some problems with a lot of roses dying from the rosette disease that is borne by mites on the air. They land on the roses, kill the roses, and we dig them up. And we've probably taken out 150 roses in the last 2 years. This winter coming, we hope to be able to replant some more roses back and see how they do. But right now we're putting in more color with perennials, and there'll be some bulbs and that type of thing as we go along throughout the rest of the summer. We'll be adding those things to it. But it's a very nice garden. It does get a lot of utilization, a lot of picture taken in there for different things, wedding photography or graduation photos. But it's another, nice garden on campus. It's really kind of just sitting there waiting for use. We'd like to see you come out and use it more.
If the Horseshoe is the crowning glory of the USC campus, the President's House Garden is the jewel in the crown, if you will. This is, it's fairly unique for the president of such a large institution to live right in the heart of campus, but it's been a real asset, and the garden has been a wonderful space. It's used for special events as well as just for the personal use of the president and his family. But Charlie puts a lot of work into keeping this garden in top shape year round.
Well, we do a lot of work there. That's where we're focused out of. Our offices are actually in the annex, which is the former slave quarters on campus. And I think it's the only slave quarters left from any Southern university still standing on campus, and we do utilize it. I have some great help with Donita Harris there. We spend a lot of time in that garden, manicuring it, getting it ready for functions. Some years they have up to 250 functions a year at the house. So we do a lot of turnover there with things going on and we try to keep it looking as good every day as we can as the day before. So things come up spontaneously, and so we're always aware of that and try to keep it looking nice and colorful year round with flowers and pots, a lot of pots and things like that. And you can see here we have a new greenhouse. It's about 5 years old, and it's been quite a great asset to us. It was down in the old Rose Garden, but we've moved it up here when the School of Journalism took over that space. And again, we use that for a lot of the house plants that come in and out of the house, and also things that we use for special functions. And we have a cutting garden there in front of it that we use a lot of the flowers in the house during the special events that go on. So anyway, we really work the soil there and keep it going. And here you can see we have the vegetable garden that is utilized for foremost for the President's House functions. And when they're not having functions, then we donate those crops to either the student pantry, or for people who might need a little extra food during the month that are students here, or any other organization that is in need of food to get through. Former First Lady Patricia Moore Pastides did a lot to get the garden kind of where it is now with the beds and the fencing and all, and we appreciate that. It keeps not only the animals out, but it also keeps wayward garden pickers out. So anyway, we have these community vegetable gardens here that student, faculty, or staff can rent out, although there's not a fee to it, but they can utilize those during the course of a year. So you can see these are pretty full with summer vegetables right now, and they get a lot of utilization. Groups usually will use those and share the produce together, and they can use it however they want. Some of them do donate it to other areas.
Planting beds near the Russell House are another feature area that Charlie and his team keep looking great year round. Some of the plantings around the Russell House also feature culinary herbs, as well as more ornamentals like you see here.
Yeah, this is this year's landscaping. We change it every year. I believe it's this year's, maybe. Anyway,
Yeah.
and in the back, we do have a community herb garden. People that want to walk by and pick different herbs to utilize in their dorm rooms or in their apartments, whatever they're back there. We try to keep those going healthy, and everything we do on campus is organically grown, whether it's the flower beds, the vegetable gardens, or like that herb garden. There's very little that we use any type of chemical fertilizer on. I don't know what it is we do that with, but everything else is done organically on campus. And that those were crepe myrtles right there in the middle of that bed, by the way. Yeah, those are white crepe myrtles.
And Charlie, the crepe myrtles around Columbia seem to be succumbing to this bark scale. Do you want to mention any of that, or
yeah,
how are we doing on those?
It depends on the location. If they're really crowded together, they tend to get it more if they're under stress. These that you see here have no scale on them, which turns the bark black from the exudate of the insects on them, and ends up can defoliate the leaves because they cover the leaves up, and they suck the juices from the plant through the leaves. But these trees are doing very good there. We've had some other ones more in the tree zone that the city owns that have not done well, and they have removed some of those. And so we try to keep an eye on that and try to get it. It's hard to deal with, and we're trying to figure out what to do exactly about that, but I think we're going in the right direction with it.
This is a shot over by Thomas Cooper Library, and it shows a new small garden called the Richard Greener Garden. It was constructed around the installation of one of the most recent statues on the campus. Richard Greener was the first African-American professor here at UofSC during Reconstruction. He was teaching here between 1873 and 1877. And about 3 years ago, well, longer than that, this was a concerted effort coming out of the Department of Education here that called attention to Greener's really groundbreaking role and all the things he brought to USC. So this was a great little project. In the background, on the terraces on either side of the Cooper Library is a current project we're working on to try and increase the green space along there. And again, a nice little smaller intimate spaces that students can retreat to. Heading east from the Horseshoe, you'll encounter Gibbes Green, which is another little campus quad bounded by buildings that have they date more to the early 20th century. This is Barnwell, Sloan, LeConte, Pettigrew, and Davis. And this area kind of has a feel of like almost Central Park in a way, much more ornamental, lots of traditional Southern plants, azaleas, camellias, and a variety of things like that. We try to find the right balance between a lot of seasonal interest and color and relatively low maintenance.
There's a lot of interest in that area year round with the different plantings. So from spring through summer into the winter, there's usually something blooming or something that looks really good there because of the vast number of trees and shrubs that are in there.
A.C. Moore Garden is a small and kind of out of the way green space. It's about a 2-acre space just on the eastern edge of campus off of Blossom Street. It features a small pond and a gazebo. And due to its location and a fairly steep topography that separates it from the main campus area, it remains kind of underutilized and more of a quiet space. But it has received attention from a variety of student groups over the last couple years who are interested in taking it on as a fraternity project, kind of an adopt a space concept. And even some students in academic classes are interested in kind of more of an ecological approach to the garden. So we welcome all of that kind of activity and interest. A.C. Moore is also the home to a couple lovely memorial donations where people have donated benches or plants, trees, shrubs, made in honor of loved ones who had a Carolina connection. So that's, we remain very grateful for that kind of thing. This is the gazebo. Another new garden is the Finlay Gardens, and this is also on the east side of campus near Capstone and Columbia Hall. It's kind of sandwiched in between the old BA building, Business Administration building at Close Hip, and those two residential towers. So it's a house that was built in the early 1950s and came into the university's possession in the 70s, and had was originally featured a lovely large-scale mixed perennial shrub border that had fallen into disrepair. And thanks to another very generous alumni gift, the gardens were revived and refreshed. And again, it's a nice little pocket park for people to enjoy in the middle of a very dense campus.
That's a great space there, and I think it'll be used for a lot of special events in the future. We continue to add to that as it goes along to kind of keep it full and vibrant. It was designed, I guess, a couple years ago, installed, and we've added to it since, trying to up it, the color that you can see year round, and I think we've done a good job, and we have some good maintenance guys over there working on it, and has really turned into quite a beautiful garden there.
In the last couple of years, most of the campus growth has been on the west side of campus, really between Assembly Street and the river. So Foundation Square was a kind of new public space that took advantage of the area in front of the Colonial Life Arena where the basketball games are played. Over 120 trees were planted on the four corners of that intersection there at Lincoln and Green Streets. The trees are now, after 5 years, finally getting big enough to really make a difference and make it feel like a real park space. In addition, the photo shows some rain garden type planters along the edge of the street that serve to both protect the pedestrian areas, but also collect runoff. And it's an opportunity to use some plants that you might not see typically in an urban streetscape.
Emily did a great job with the landscape plant selection there, and it's held up and continues to look better every year. And you know, a lot of people don't realize it's there, and those fountains that are down there are really nice. They really add to the ambiance of that whole area. And once the trees get bigger, it will be quite a beautiful place.
Adjacent to the Foundation Square area is the Darla Moore School of Business. And it features a more austere, kind of contemporary set of plantings, both on the interior courtyards. And this is a courtyard separating the business school from the old Coliseum. And this is a stand of about, I don't know, maybe almost 24 sweet bay magnolias. And they have really matured to about a 25 and 30 foot height, as you can see here, really creating the kind of shaded spaces that are pretty essential in Columbia's climate. The Moore School also features over an acre of green roof gardens. This is just one small fragment of it on the fourth floor. On the floor above, there's a much more expansive green roof garden that's part of the energy efficiency goals for that space.
That's a great garden with a variety of plant material. And overall, it's done okay. There are some issues with it, but it's really nice to go up there and see that walk in that patio area and look at that garden, see what you can grow on top of a roof with about 6 or 7 inches of soil, I think, or less maybe, but it's done quite well, actually.
We have two traditional green roof gardens, and then another 2 are planted with raised planters. I think that's right, Charlie, right? Is that?
Yeah, I think Gambrell and the Student Health Center and then the School of Journalism has more of a, well, they have planters and they have more of a green roof type.
Yeah, yeah.
We manage those also. We don't manage the Moore School roof, but we do manage the other ones just on a regular basis.
Green roofs are a real challenge for the Midlands climate. These are typically much more, you see them more frequently in the Northeast, Pacific Northwest. Even Washington, D.C. has a little more moderate climate, but the combination of humidity, rainfall, and winter weather just makes it a pretty limited plant palette. Do you want to expand at all on that, Charlie?
Well, they've used a lot of not quite xeric, but maybe more Mediterranean plants there. You can see the different varieties. There's sedums, there's some tick seed or coreopsis, it looks like. That might be an artemisia, maybe there's silver there, I can't remember. But what has surprised me is that as tall as that roof is, especially on the upper level, how many seeds from weeds and trees have blown in up on that upper level and germinated in that very rocky, gritty soil and done quite well. I'm sure if they were continued to grow, they would probably at some point punch a hole through the liner. But they're maintained and managed so that we don't have that problem. But it's quite, it astounded me how the weed seeds really get on the current of air and land up way up there, especially on the backside is way up. But overall, it's looked pretty good. It's done its job.
So that kind of winds up our campus tour today. We hope you have enjoyed this virtual visit, and certainly hope you can visit the campus in person in the near future. At this point, we'll look over at the chat line and be happy to answer any questions both about the campus itself or any other general gardening questions. Okay, Chris asks, what tree is in the center?
I think that was those crepe myrtles that came up about.
Oh, okay, great.
In front of the Russell House.
Okay.
Yeah.
Charlie, can you see the?
I see it says, what plant works best for my screening my neighbor's backyard with part sun and shade? You know, there's a lot of plants that could do that depending on the height you wanted. Everything from wax myrtles and camellias of different, either Sasanqua or Camellia japonica, the cryptomerias. These are all evergreen trees. I assume you'd want an evergreen screen. But, you know, there's just a plethora of things, the tea olives, things that are like shrubs that make great screening material, and some of the viburnums are great. I think even azalea indica, the southern azalea, is great. If you give it time, it will get 10 to 12 foot tall eventually, which is also a great screen, and you have that color in the spring for a couple of weeks.
I'm using Foster hollies planted on about 10-foot centers.
Oh, yeah.
On my property, and that's because I don't need the screening down low with a 6-foot fence, but between a 6 and 20-foot height is where I'd like to kill the view. So something like a Foster holly or other upright conical holly is good, because sometimes you have to also consider whether you are in any power line right away areas. In my neighborhood, the power lines run in between the backside of the houses. So the power company comes in quite frequently, and they hate trees. So they create that nice view corridor so everybody can look into everybody else's house.
Bianca had a question about rosemary on campus and how's the best way to grow that. We have it planted out. Some of it we pulled up, it just got to be so large and rambunctious that some areas were pulled out, but it grows best with either drip or low irrigation. I don't think it really likes to be sprayed over the top so much. It is a Mediterranean plant. In the winter, it's going to be the worst season for it if you're in clay soil, but here in Columbia downtown, we have a sandy loam. So we're not really swamped with the water in the winter as they might be out around Lake Murray or somewhere where the soil is more clay. That might present more problems, but it goes great in pots up until it outgrows them, and you just start another one. They grow so fast. It really, they're an easy plant here in Columbia. Somebody had a question about some tomatoes. I know the heat is a problem in the summer. The pollen stops being effective. They quit pollinating after 95 degrees, so you tend to lose your tomato crop when it gets really hot. But if you left them in the ground and can nurture them on, they would start back again producing after it cooled off in September somewhat. So that's one thing you might want to keep in mind. A lot of people just plant another crop of tomatoes and let them start growing now for fall crop of tomatoes.
Charlie, you want to go back to talk about the crepe myrtles and the relative invasiveness? I guess that means just That could be either reseeding or suckering up from the
Yeah,
base.
they do both. They do reseed, and that's not so much a problem for us. They're easy to pull up. You know, they don't get rooted in before you notice them, and they're fairly easy to control that way. And we keep the suckers off ours with just pruning practices. And anytime you dig around a crepe myrtle and cut any of the roots, it usually sends up a shoot from that cut, and you'll have roots coming up right in the middle of the plant you just planted because that's where the root was cut. And again, we just prune those off and they eventually quit coming up, and that's not a problem anymore.
Daylily blooming.
Well, daylilies, some are repeat, but most are one time for a couple weeks during the season. But there are some repeats like Happy Returns, the Stella d'Oro. There's a red one, I forget the name of this, akin to Happy Returns, or I forget the name of it, but it has a red flower on it also that will repeat bloom. But most of them are one time, but although there are daylilies that you can plant progressively that are mid, early, late, they're all different season type flowering on those.
So about for the non-rebloomers, about a 3 to 4 week window is pretty much the best.
Yeah, the most. I mean, even if you fertilize them, they're not going to bloom anymore. They're just a one-time flower, just like an azalea or something.
But well worth it.
Oh yeah, a lot of color.
How about keeping a sable palm healthy?
A sago?
I think it's a sable. The question is how to treat a sable palm when the fronds are turning yellow.
That's just an annual thing. We cut those off usually. They die up from the bottom. We just trim them off every year, and we keep them pruned that way. We don't have much trouble with them otherwise. Sometimes they will get a scale insect on them or a mealybug, but I've never had much trouble with that. A lot of times a sharp spray of water will get a lot of those things off. I see Mr. McMaster has offered a question about crepe myrtles and seeing ants on them. Those ants are out actually farming, they call it, either aphids or other insects on the crepe myrtles. They will go up there and they will exudate from the insects on the crepe myrtles. Has a lot of sugar in it from the plants they've been sucking on, so the ants will farm that as a nutrient source and take it back to their hives and feed the ants in the hives. But that's why you see ants on crepe myrtles a lot of times.
Okay, there's a question about small areas on campus that might be something you could replicate or take inspiration by for a home landscape. And I would go back to the small spaces around the horseshoe. They are more in scale with a typical residential yard. McCutcheon House has a nice patio, of course, for outdoor dining. But the 4 areas we mentioned, and a couple of the buildings have some foundation plantings that you can use or replicate in the residential home landscape. So I would say just kind of a notebook tour around the horseshoe would give plenty of inspiration.
We also have that mixed perennial border behind Pinckney Legree, which is on the horseshoe, the backside of it. The backside of Rutledge Chapel, we have another little garden. I call it the blue garden because I'm trying to get blue foliage plants to go in there. And a lot of those things we've either grown from cuttings ourselves or gotten as very small plants. And of course, the trick there is that we always amend the soil very well before we start any planting. We do a lot of tilling and composting and other organic fertilizers that go into the beds that really pay off and how they do in the long run. So that's what we've been doing some of the campus areas, small gardens like that.
The best kind of grass for a full sun yard. Well, you have everything to choose from because grass loves full sun, and really your secondary issue would be how much foot traffic you have on that yard.
Yeah, any of the grasses. Some are more shade tolerant, zoysia and St. Augustine, but St. Augustine has a very coarse texture. You mow it up higher, whereas zoysia, you can get the really fine texture and you can mow it lower. So it depends on the look you want, the color. Some green grasses are more dark green than say some of this other grasses. So and also zoysia you don't mow as much, whereas the Bermuda you might mow a lot more, or even a St. Augustine you might mow a little more.
Yeah. I think the trend has been to more of a zoysia grass in full sun areas. We plant mostly zoysia, Bermuda, or St. Augustine to a lesser degree. We've got a lot of questions here. Chili pepper care. Do you want to tackle that, Charlie?
I saw that question. You're growing them in buckets. 5 gallons, it should be enough for a pepper plant. As long as you got good drainage in it, good soil, so it's not a mucky type thing. They should have no trouble. I would fertilize them probably once a month with a fertilizer recommended for vegetable plants. Just keep them up off the ground a little bit or set them on something so the water draining out doesn't get stopped by the rim of the bucket on the bottom, and then it ends up drowning the plants. But as long as you keep them well drained and fertilized, you should have no trouble in a 5 gallon bucket. If you just have one in a bucket, it should do very well.
Charlotte, do you think they're sensitive also to the pollination, the high temperature effect on pollination? Is that a factor?
I think they're not as bad as tomatoes, actually. They will keep going through the summer usually. And here's a question about irises. This is a great time to dig up irises. You need to split them with at least one fan on them and the roots on them, and you can cut them back and then you can plant them in the ground. They'll look crappy. Oh, shouldn't have said that. They look bad for a little while and then they will, come back in the spring and look really good. So yeah, I would divide your irises now if you wanted to. You can also divide daylilies now. And both of those, you cut back the foliage by at least half and you can replant them very easily.
The campus herb garden we mentioned earlier, it's not really an obvious herb garden, but a lot of culinary herbs have been woven into the ornamental plantings that Charlie has put on the Russell House terrace.
It's in the rear and it's in the big round bed in the middle of the terrace out there where all the tables are and that type of thing. So. And there's usually, I think we have some signage out there to what herbs are what out there, so you should be able to see what you're getting when you pick it. And we encourage you to pick it also.
Is there a specific kind of plant food fertilizer, particularly organic, that you would recommend, and what kind of application timing?
Well, it depends on what you're fertilizing. We use a lot of the Espoma products because they are organic. I use a lot of the chicken manure, which is very potent, very stinky, but it does a great job. We use that on the initial planting, and then we might switch to a holly tone for their azaleas and other shrubs. And then there's a vegetable fertilizer of the same type, same manufacturer. I'm not promoting anybody, but I'm just saying those work well for us organically that we use. They're more of a slow release than a quick release, and they do quite well. We use fish emulsions also. When we need to, especially on the vegetable garden. Let's see. The fire ant problem is always a problem. I'm assuming red ants are fire ants. There's several different things out there. You can go to Lowe's and find things listed for fire ants. I tend to use Amdro on the campus. It's a bait. It's not something immediate. They take it in. It takes about 3 or 4 days for them to get to the queen with it. And then the ant mound does diminish over about a 10-day period where it's no longer active anymore.
We have a question about the Thuya green giant versus Leyland cypress. And in my experience, the Thuya has been an excellent replacement substitution for Leyland cypresses, which are just were overplanted and quite susceptible to a number of insects and disease.
Yeah, and also I like the cryptomeria. It's about the same size as the Leyland cypress and similar texture, dark green, fairly fast grower as both is the the green giant. So yeah, either one of those are great plants.
Pruning and shaping up of knockout roses. That's typically a January, February thing in my book. Is that right?
It is, and I have seen people just shear the heck out of knockout roses, and they come back and they just bloom like crazy. But even on knockout roses, we didn't have that many, but the city had planted a bunch, as did the state, and they got really covered up by that rose rosette. And so we took any knockout roses we have removed because most of them did have the rose rosette. So, but you can shear them a couple times a year. You can treat them like a regular hybrid tea rose or a floribunda, where you would cut it back, the canes back in February or so, glue the stems where the cuts are, and fertilize them at that time, and they'll be great right on through the spring.
And it looks like we have a question on growing plants from cuttings. You mentioned that so much of what you're able to do, you actually take from cuttings, and you really make the budget go a long way that way.
Oh yeah, we do a lot of cuttings for flower perennials mostly, and we do it a lot of woodies also. That's a little more of a skill type cutting, but you get the right rooting hormone, and you can do a lot of things with that. Some things you don't need rooting hormones. A lot of annuals you can just stick in another pot of soil, and they'll root. Coleus and even some petunias you can get to root. But we root a lot of things in our production house behind the green quad. And anyway, salvias root really easily. The perennial or the annuals, those are easy to root. But we do root conifers and different things like Japanese maples, azaleas. And a lot of that depends on when you take the cuttings. After June the 1st usually is when you take cuttings of woody plant material. But anything else, perennials, you can take that anytime, except probably in the winter, of course.
Maybe we can talk about ground cover. What's your top 3 ground covers for sun, and then maybe your top 3 ground covers for a more shady exposure?
Oh, well, you know, I like a lot of different things for shade, ground cover. We use that strawberry begonia, which has done real well for us, and has a spring flower, late spring. It's great little texture. And I use, a lot of times I will use hellebores as a ground cover because they reseed so much that they actually form a great ground cover. And we've had good luck with some of the liriopes for sun or shade, and then also some of the ophiopogons, which are the little smaller leaf monkey grass, as people call them. There's the real dwarf one, and then there's the regular Ophiopogon japonica, narrow leaf, spreads a little faster than the dwarf one, but those are great. You know, they eat up leaves. You don't have to worry so much about the leaf problem in the fall. They'll absorb that, and you don't mow them. So it's a great alternative to trying to either mulch a big area or that you end up having to remulch because the leaves mess it up or whatever. So that might.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of that mondo in areas on the Horseshoe, particularly in front of the President's House garden, where it's a nice alternative to mulch under the large trees. And as Charlie said, it makes a year-round, very nice ground cover.
Yeah, and it's a little slower, and I'm still learning, thank goodness. I'm not too old to learn, although I'm fairly old, but I do learn new things, and I'm still learning on how the best way to grow that dwarf mondo and how to really make it get going, because we've had some die out in patches, and I don't know if it's from the trees it's next to or, you know, whatever, but I'm still learning on that. So, and Arthur, I am not sure about if this presentation has been recorded or not. I assume it might be, but I don't know.
I think Haven has covered that answer.
Okay, good.
The
I see that.
question is on deer repellent, deterring deer. Of course, you try to find plants that the deer don't prefer, but that can be a very short list.
It is, and you know, eventually they'll eat anything if they're hungry enough. But the the trick is to try to get them to eat in your neighbor's yard is the best thing to do. And, you know, people hang up Irish Spring soap bars, or, you know, there's deer repellent. I use an electric fence, but at my parents' garden, they jump over that. If they want to eat those sweet potato vines, they'll do it. It doesn't really matter. But, you know, overall, it's just trial and error with a lot of things. And some things they really love. And you just got to be wary of that if you really have a big deer problem, not to use those things that are like dessert for them.
If Irene is still on the chat, maybe Irene, you could clarify the space you're talking to. The question is, what are the plans for the space next to the library and Sumter Street? The Honors College is planning a new wing that will be at Sumter and Blossom Street, but that project has been postponed for the time being. There are no other major building projects between Cooper Library and Sumter Street, but you may see a lot of maintenance vehicles in this zone. Across from the Honors College, that would be the McBride area, perhaps. The McBride are some old 60s eras dormitories between the latest edition of the library and Blossom Street. And in the long range plan, those buildings will ultimately come down, and it's not anticipated that any buildings would fill that.
They have just renovated the drive area, I think, for emergency access. I think some of that was going on. I don't know if you thought maybe that was part of something else.
No, that was a fire lane. We
Yeah.
just paved a fire lane that had not held up to traffic. We had used initially a grass pave, which is a plastic grid reinforcing a turf. And it's okay for very minimal vehicular traffic, but we just had a conflict with too many uses, and we ended up putting pavers in that space.
Somebody had a question about being new to gardening and wanting to start a small vegetable garden and herb garden. Preparation in both finding out information and soil preparation are very important to start with, because otherwise you could end up with disappointing results and you wouldn't want to do it anymore. But that other university up the street called Clemson has a great extension service, which has lots of information on vegetable garden especially, and any other type of shrub problems, that type of thing. That's a good resource. Local nurseries, not the big box, but local nurseries, everybody there, somebody there anyway, and most of everybody there knows about the plants they're selling, so you can ask there about what plant works well, what should I fertilize them with, how do I take care of them, will they grow here, should I build a raised bed? A lot of those people will know those answers to the questions. We have some great local nurseries where you can get a lot of information from. So I would try that first.
Okay, a preferred homemade recipe for a 5-1-1 fertilizer mix.
I don't know about the ratio exactly, but I used to make my own for the rose garden. I would use everything from alfalfa meal, blood meal, beet pulp. You know, there's all types of organic, usually fodder feed for livestock. And then you use some lime in it. You might use green sand. There's just a lot of different things, but a lot of these organic fertilizers already bagged up, make it real easy, I found out. So I'm kind of going in that direction instead of mixing my own, buying 50-pound bags of alfalfa meal and all those other things and stirring them up. But you probably could find that online on some source, I'm sure, if you wanted to do it that way. I tell you, the question about the deer and the desserts, hosta is probably their #1 plant. I don't grow hosta pretty much. They're kind of hard in Columbia anyway, but they do love hosta. They love my parents' sweet potato vines growing up in the garden with the edible sweet potatoes, not the ornamental, but they ate my sister's ornamental sweet potatoes down in Hilton Head. So they love sweet potato vines, so the leaves on them. They love hibiscus leaves. There's a lot of things they really like, but again, that's trial and error. It depends on how hungry they are. They end up eating a lot of things you wouldn't think they would. But they are prone not to eat things that are too rough on their tongues or their mouths or lips or whatever. So that might be one thing to consider is the texture of the plant. Let's see, we got any more on there? Oh, somebody did ask about leaf yellow on rosemary plants, and that is probably an annual problem. They drop really, all plants will drop their leaves once a year. Not all of them, but they can't keep every leaf they ever produce on a plant. It wouldn't support itself. So just like a pine tree or a magnolia or an azalea, rosemary will drop its leaves at some point during the year to take on the new leaves that they grow through that course of, growing the new plant, the new leaves out. But this time of year, it could be a problem with maybe a little too dry or too hot. And but rosemary has a very sticky sap, and so that's usually not a problem for that plant, although sometimes it will get a sucking insect who must like rosemary oil. So I don't know for sure if that's an insect problem or just a cultural problem with the rosemary, but I do know they do lose their leaves once a year. All right. We invite you to come by the way, and look at some of the gardens on campus. If you see anybody around in a green shirt, ask them a question and maybe they can answer it for you. But we're always glad to give people information. We'll share plants with you or cuttings, get those plants out there in your yard if you'd like. So come by and see us sometime.
Right. We had tons of questions, but it looks like you guys wrapped them all up. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I know that we all learned so much about gardening. I'm going to take some of those tips back personally to my little garden as well. So I appreciate you both. And thank you to everyone who logged on today. I hope you all enjoyed the event. If you're interested in joining any of our other online events, you can look at our events page on our website, UofSCalumni.org/events. Thank you, Charlie and Emily.
Thanks. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you.
All right, everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.